The most haunted islands on Earth. On our planet, there are roughly 2,000 islands, many of which are occupied and many of which are not. Some islands sit abandoned and lost to time. Others are yet to be discovered. There are islands which are populated by the living, breathing humans and spirits who coexist. And there are those that have been abandoned and remain the property of spirits alone. Here, we'll show you some of the creepiest places in the world. Poveglia Island. This itty-bitty little island is found in the Venetian lagoon between Lido and Venice in northern Italy. The history of the scary place begins in 421, and it was lived on until 1379, when the residents had to flee warfare. Then, in 1776, it became a quarantine station for plague victims and those with other diseases, and it stayed a quarantine station for more than 100 years. That means it was also a mass burial ground for those who passed from their afflictions, and it's said to be extremely haunted. An asylum was opened on Poveglia in the 1920s, and it's been said that doctors there performed various experiments on unwitting patients, some of whom did not survive. The public cannot visit it, but it was auctioned off fairly recently for £400,000. Okinawa. Now, if there's a haunted place, it's Okinawa. If you know anything about history, you'll know that a pretty intense battle happened on it during the Second World War. The action was so intense, and both sides fought so hard that it lasted 82 days. The Americans lost 12,520 troops. The Japanese lost around 110,000, and it's been estimated that somewhere between 40 and 150,000 citizens of Okinawa lost their lives during the battle. It wasn't just the fighting that took lives either. Many Japanese soldiers took their own lives in tunnels and jumped off cliffs to avoid capture by the Americans. Tons of paranormal activity has been reported here in hotels, haunted hospitals, in the forests, and just about everywhere else on the island. Isle of Wight. It's not only the second most populated island in England, but it's widely considered to be the most haunted island in England. There are many places where one may find a good ghost adventure. It's also a place where many sufferers of tuberculosis lost their lives, and their spirits are often seen floating or heard groaning. Not to mention Knighton Gorge's manor, which was destroyed in 1821 but supposedly reappears from time to time in ghostly form. Norfolk Island. This Pacific island is found within a triangle between New Caledonia, Australia, and New Zealand. It's far, far away from each and isolated too, so no wonder it was once used by the British to isolate and punish some of the worst prisoners. At least that's what we once thought, but a study done in 2011 painted a different reality than what history has told. It was once said that prisoners sent there had been spared the death penalty for major or repeat offenses as long as they spent the rest of their lives on the island. The truth is, most sent there committed property crimes, and most didn't receive a colonial conviction and were just shipped off to live on the island for an average of 3 years. Despite that, Norfolk was plagued with assaults, torture, and other violent crimes, all of which has led to the place gaining a reputation for being terribly haunted. Alcatraz Island. Is there any way that this island wouldn't be haunted? It sits in San Francisco Bay, just 1.25 miles off the coast of San Francisco, and has a colored history. Alcatraz was first recorded in the 1800s by a Spanish explorer named Juan Manuel Diaz, who recognized its popularity with pelicans. The Spanish built a few minor buildings on it, but by 1846 it was bought by the Americans and was quickly fortified and called Fortress Alcatraz. It remained a military-controlled island throughout the Civil War. It eventually became home to arguably the most famous penitentiary in American history, where torture, attacks, and worse occurred. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, which was once known as one of the worst and most secure prisons in the world, housed some of America's most terrible and vicious criminals. Many ghostly activities have been reported on the island, and possessions are said to happen there as well. Corregidor Island. This was a heavily fought-over island throughout much of the Second World War, with many American, Filipino, and Japanese losses. It was once controlled by the United States Army forces, but was taken in 1942 by the Japanese. Once there, the Japanese starved and tortured many Filipinos and Americans, with estimates putting the loss of life in this period around 3,000. Then, in 1945, the United States decided they were taking the island back, which became known as the Battle of Corregidor. 207 Americans are said to have lost their lives, as well as a relatively significant number of Filipinos. But it was the Japanese that sustained the most substantial losses, with roughly 6,600 out of 6,700 soldiers either taking their own lives or having their lives taken from them. With that much horror and devastation, it's no wonder that many say the island is haunted by many, many spirits. Dead Man Island. This terrible-sounding island can be found in Cole Harbour, just south of Stanley Park in Vancouver, British Columbia. Do you want to know why it's called Dead Man Island? There are many reasons why it's known by this, including the fact that it's been a battle site, a squatter and smallpox settlement, and a tree burial cemetery over the years. What exactly is a tree burial cemetery, you may ask? Well, the Squamish people once used the trees on the island to hang cedar boxes containing the remains of those who had passed on. During an outbreak of smallpox from 1888 to 1892, it was used as a quarantine site, and those who couldn't fend off their affliction were laid to rest here. There have been reports of hauntings and peculiar, otherworldly activities occurring on the island for more than 100 years. Ellis Island. This little island was the gateway to America for many an immigrant from 1892 on through 1964, and more than 12 million people passed through it. It's also sometimes referred to as Island of Tears or the Isle of Tears, considering it was the make or break checkpoint for those wishing to start over in the country. Thousands were turned away due to various reasons, and sometimes families were separated or sent back altogether. More than 3,500 people lost their lives on the island as well, most of which perished in quarantine. There were also many instances of people taking their own lives after being denied entry to America, and many will testify to hearing and seeing many strange things there. Doors are slammed, invisible children laugh or cry, non-existent candles burn, and voices of many are heard, making this a truly scary landmark that played an important role in history. Mackinac Island. This next island can be found near the eastern end of the Straits of Mackinac in Lake Huron, and what was once a battlefield and Indian burial area is now a vacation spot. It was home to the indigenous Ottawa, a tribe of Native Americans, but they fell victim to annihilation by the Seneca people one winter long ago, and only 2 local natives escaped by hiding. It was also important to the fur trade and the site of 2 brutal battles during the War of 1812. There were also accusations of witchcraft happening on the island, and 7 women were accused. The test to see if they were innocent? Tie rocks to their feet and throw them into a lagoon. If they floated, they were deemed witches. If they sank, they were innocent. All 7 sank and drowned. There's more than enough blood and sadness on the island just to assume it's haunted, and many places on it are thought to be so. Isla de las Muñecas. There are those who like dolls, and there are those who are terrified of them. Its name translates to Island of the Dolls, and it can be found near Mexico City. The island was once owned by Don Julian Santana Barrera, a man who kept to himself, and it's said he found a girl drowned in a canal on the island. He found a doll floating nearby and hung it on a tree where the girl was found as a sign of respect. Legend has it that he began hearing whispers, wails, and footsteps in the woods around his hut. In an attempt to appease the spirit of the girl, he spent the next half-century hanging dolls all over the island. It's also rumored that Barrera was later found drowned in the same spot he saw the girl, and the Isla de las Muñecas has become a popular ghost hunting, television filming, and tourist exploring attraction. Hashima Island. This super haunted island is also called Gunkanjima, or the Battleship Island. That's because it looks like a terrifying, sunken, monstrous wreck of a battleship. It's abandoned and sits roughly 15 miles from the famous city of Nagasaki in Japan, and is just one of 505 islands in the Nagasaki prefecture that is uninhabited. It became known for its undersea coal mining operations which ceased in 1974 when the coal reserves became depleted, and then everyone left. While it was still in service, thousands of Koreans were forced into labor in the mines, and at one point it was the most densely populated place in the world. There were almost 6,000 people on an island which measures only 15 acres. It is now a ghost town to the living, but it's said that past inhabitants still remain. We just can't see them. Alright, we've seen some genuinely spooky and spectacular haunted places so far, and we still have one more to go. First though, we'd like to ask you, what are some haunted places you've been? Or if you have any good ghost stories, we'd love to check them out in the comments down below. 1. Star Island. This island sits on the division between Maine and New Hampshire and is just one island in the Isle of Shoals that does so. It spans 38 acres, and many say that the entirety of the island is haunted, not just a few buildings or locations around it. There have been reports about a strange, intimidating black dog with red eyes that roams Star Island. 3 sisters who sadly lost their lives 3 days apart back in 1863 have been spotted playing near where they are actually buried. A doctor's spirit supposedly still roams the doctor's cottage, following him taking his own life years ago. A malicious spirit is said to attempt to push visitors down sets of stairs in Cottage E. And the Oceanic Hotel's 4th floor is apparently the most haunted of all, with doors frequently slamming closed and opening on their own, and furniture is dragged around by forces nobody can see. Yeah, sounds pretty haunted to us.